This week on The Futurists, the return of Brian Solis with Dave Wright.
You have to be thinking about the future, and you have to be prepared to be wrong. As Sir Ken Robinson said, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. And if you don't come up with anything original, you can't be innovative, and you can't create new value. So I want people to understand that we have stigmatized being wrong, and that is the worst thing to do right now here as we reimagine the future with AI.
Hey there, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tercek, and this week I've got a returning guest, someone who's very familiar to our longtime listeners, and he's brought a colleague with him. So welcome back to the show, Brian Solis. Great to see you again, man.
Rob, it is always good to see you. I am excited to be back. It's been too long, and thank you for having us on today.
Oh, very happy to do it. I'm excited to hear about your new book, but for our listeners, give us a little catch up because it's been some time since I talked to you. I don't think you've been on the show with me since you joined ServiceNow. So tell us about that.
Things have been a little busy, Rob. In fact, I don't know if our colleague,
talked in a while.
our colleague Dave, when he comes on, I joined ServiceNow about 3.5 years ago, and we have been, I think you can appreciate this, we have been in pretty much startup mode since I've joined. This is the company is called a rocket ship for a reason, and things have been moving pretty fast. And I'm excited to share a lot of those updates with you. But one of the things that we managed to get out the door is a new book, and it is the result of our work. Yes,
yeah, the book is called Infinite, and you and Dave co-wrote it.
We did, and
great.
that was a blast. And not only did we co-write it, write it together. It is the result of the work we're doing together and the conversations that we have on a day-to-day basis. And it was probably one of my...
Before we get too far down that track, let's introduce Dave. I feel awkward here because
I feel like we should do that.
Dave is hanging out patiently for us, waiting for us to introduce him. So Dave Wright, welcome to the show. Welcome to The Futurist. It's a pleasure to have you here, Dave.
All right. Thanks for inviting me on, Rob. Really is a pleasure to be here.
Now, Dave, I became aware of you as the Chief Innovation Officer at ServiceNow.
Correct.
But my understanding is that your mission has changed. Your title and your responsibilities have changed somewhat.
So I guess the job title itself is still the same for me. I'm still the Chief Innovation Officer, but the actual role within the team changed. So what we realized was we were called the Innovation Office, and what we were doing was we were looking at technology that was going to affect us in the future. But it was causing a misconception, and I suppose I still get it a little bit, that all the innovation in the entire company sat in this team. And you never want to work for a company where there's a specific group that just does innovation. Innovation should run across your whole company. So what we did was we looked at what we do, and we said, well, actually, we're looking at what could happen in the future from a technology perspective. So we rebranded the entire group as ServiceNow Futures. And now we spend a lot of time looking at different technologies, thinking about what that technology means to multiple different layers. So not just what it means to ServiceNow, but we'll start having debates around what does it mean to society? What does it mean to how you change management structures? What does it mean to how you'll run an enterprise? And we take that and we use it to try and influence things that ServiceNow does and the way that ServiceNow thinks.
And just to put this in perspective, for folks who might not be familiar with ServiceNow, ServiceNow is in the general category known as software as a service. And in your history, the company was focused on IT, providing tools for IT managers to handle things like, help tickets or support tickets and so forth. Of course, the company's evolved way past that. Dave, I think you just mentioned before we got started that when you joined 15 years ago, there were about 300 employees. Yeah. And now it's this gigantic, sprawling enterprise. So for folks who have not been paying attention to the SaaS field, ServiceNow has been a fast-growing company and it's evolving in many different ways. But AI presents a significant challenge, not just to ServiceNow, but also to your customers. Now, This isn't necessarily a show about ServiceNow, but that'll be helpful context as we go, because we'll probably return to it. What I'd like to do is go back to the book, because Brian had mentioned it earlier, and I'm sorry I cut you off, Brian. I just wanted to make sure Dave got into the chat room here.
You're the only one allowed, you and my wife.
Okay, great. Okay, so the book's called Infinite, and tell me about that. Unpack that for me. What do you mean by infinite?
Dave, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I guess so. So we'd had we've been having all these discussions with different companies where they were all struggling on how they used AI, and they were all struggling with kind of get value back from AI. And what we realized people were doing was they were just using AI to do the things they could already do, but do it faster or do it more often. And the real benefit of AI is to use it to do the things you couldn't do before. So what we started to think about was how could you look at your company and how could you constantly think about what was next for your company? How could you constantly reinvent it? How could you constantly move on to the next thing by using AI to either provide that function or to free up the resources to allow you to create it? So the end result of this was, could you use this technology to make your company infinite? Not infinite as in it's going to grow forever, because no company's going to grow forever, but could you increase the longevity of the company by thinking about what comes next from a business perspective and using that technology to get there?
So it's AI not as a cost-cutting mechanism, but AI as kind of an adaptive resource, a tool to help a company respond to changes and adapt faster.
We think the way we talk about it, and Brian can go like a little bit more into the modality of AI, but we think of it in two ways. We think of like mode 1 and mode 2. Mode 1's very iterative, where you're just looking to improve efficiency and save cost. Mode 2 is where you're looking to be more innovative and potentially drive the top line of the company. But the reality is you need to do mode 1 and mode 2 at the same time, because mode 1 is what's going to give you the resources to drive mode 2.
I see. Okay, so there is some measure of cost-cutting benefit that companies are going to try to obtain. The problem, of course, with the most recent AI deployments at scale in large enterprises, it's been frustrating for them, partly because they just airdropped ChatGPT on a bunch of workers who had no idea what to do with it, and then secondly, there's a whole, I call it a task audit, but it's some sort of inventory of what the company actually does, the workflow of a company. If you don't do that first, you're not likely to have a successful deployment. I'm sure you've got experience doing this, because this is exactly what y'all do every single day, right? You deal with customers who are trying to figure out how to deploy AI at scale. Have you had a similar experience where there have been where customers are having a hard time figuring out what to do with it?
I think, well, Brian, I don't know, do you want to take this, talking about workflows and what that means?
I mean, I could start, and please take it on. I feel like there's part of this conversation that I want to sit on, because it's a pretty big leap as to what we propose in the book. But you're right. This task analysis is interesting, because for the most part, so if we think about the way work flows within a company today, it's usually confined to, it could be a particular aspect of work. Earlier, you talked about a help desk, a ticketing system that goes from the person who opens the ticket to the person who has to manage that ticket and bring it to closure. There's a system in between that. There's records that happen in between that, but it usually happens in a confined space, right? And so when you're looking to improve something, it's usually improving that confined space. But that is a finite approach to work. Most of the time when Dave and I are engaged in conversations with companies, it is looking at ways to improve those workflows. And the goal of that conversation is to make things more efficient, but not always because they thought about the why. So Dave and I, for example, will hear, we want to deflect 50% of inbound, or we want to automate X, Y, and Z. And Dave has the best stories for them, so I'll leave it for him to tell. But when you ask why, you don't get an answer, or you don't get a deep answer.
Yeah,
it's just usually finding a way to put the technology to work. Where we try to change the conversation, like what Dave was talking about with mode 1 and mode 2. If you're looking at improving what exists today, there also needs to be a conversation looking forward. Does what exists today deserve to work in the year 2030? Or will there be a better way to do this in the future? And if we agree on that, what would it take to do that? So now you start to not just look at the workflow, you're looking at the outcome and working backwards to that outcome. And so what happens is you realize that that workflow is not necessarily confined to that vertical silo. We can now look at splitting that work across the enterprise and making a more horizontal approach to how work flows. And that gives you the greatest return on mode 1 to give you the greatest returns to look at mode 2, which then becomes, now that we know that's possible because we asked why and we looked at to what end, what could we do that we couldn't do yesterday? And that becomes sort of the foundation for mode 2. So this is where we try to help companies take a step back and think about the why they're doing things, to then introduce ways that this technology can unlock new value, unlock new opportunities. And Dave, please build on that.
So I think one of the challenges that I see with companies is most companies are designed to run around a series of workflows that were created based on scarcity of resource. So most companies are constrained by people. So they put workflows in place to try and make sure everything's done the same way, to try and optimize that process flow so they get as much value as possible out of the limited human resources they've got. But if you suddenly swap that equation and say, well, what would happen if I give you infinite resources? What would happen if I give you agents that could do those jobs? Would those workflows still be relevant? Or is this the opportunity to say, well, let's not define a workflow based on scarcity, let's redefine it based on abundance. And there might be a lot of workflows that aren't relevant anymore. There might be a lot of stages of workflows that aren't relevant anymore. But rethinking that and understanding why you're doing something rather than just how you do it is the big difference. We had
So that requires a certain amount of like self-reflection and analysis and some critical thinking about the organization itself, which I will tell you candidly, the big companies I've talked to, they're not engaged in that process. They need an outside partner to help them. They need someone to hold up a mirror and say, look, this is what you really look like. And though that sounds like a critical defect, if you think about what a company is and what it does, it actually makes good sense, right? Most companies, Dave, to the point you were making earlier, the most people in most companies are not tasked with innovation. They're tasked with doing last year's job more efficiently next year. That's their job, right? And so they're doing like little incremental improvements along the way, but they're not changing the overall structure, and they're certainly not asking, where does this thing fit in the larger structure? That's not their remit. If you're in a department, you don't ask about the other departments around you. You might have thoughts about it, but it's not part of your responsibility. And so as a result, nobody really owns this kind of global transformation. And it seems to me that's the core message of your book. That's the core message of Infinite, which is that this is not about AI as a tool or AI for automating a single task or a series of tasks. It's about AI as a foundation for a new company. AI for a way to rethink the mission of the company and then reconceive the workflows in that business. I may have gotten it wrong. Again, I haven't read the book, but I've read about it, and I know you both, so I'm interested to see if my guess is accurate. Help me understand if that's what you're saying in Infinite.
It is. It's one of the things. If you speak to most companies, the things that they always have conversations around now, obviously it's AI. Everyone talks about AI, but then it's data and workflows. And how you utilize those three things together. And it's interesting that most companies now will have potentially a chief data officer, or they'll have someone in charge of the data lakes. They'll have maybe a chief AI officer now. You see that emerge, but no one's got a chief workflow officer. No one's got anyone that actually looks at how work flows across the organization. So one of the things we do propose in the book is that's probably almost like an evolution of a human resources function. As you start to see human resources and IT coming together, that concept of having someone who can look across the entire organization and work with the subject matter experts and say, well, is this the right workflow? Should we do that? Because to your point, Rob, people don't like to question workflows. They don't like to change things because, it's all working cool. But this is the time to question. If you bring in AI and you're doing more than using it as a tool, you've got to have that mindset. You've got to use it like a detective, right, and do an investigation. Now, let me offer a mild correction, because you said that nobody has a chief workflow officer. And I know that's one of the concepts you talk about in the book. But in fact, there is an example, and I'm sure you're familiar with her. Her name is Tracy Franklin, and she is the chief human officer, CHRO at Moderna. But her responsibilities span human workers and agentic workforce. So she's also in charge of IT. And you're nodding because I know you're familiar with this example. And she's kind of a unique case in the sense that she's got the skill set to do it.
And she's worked for these data-driven, high-tech pharmaceutical companies. So she's got this unique background and ability to do it. But it's a really important use case. And for people who are listening who aren't familiar, again, the name is Tracy Franklin. She is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Moderna. And Moderna famously is an AI-driven pharmaceutical company that uses synthetic biology to develop new kinds of vaccines. So you probably got familiar with them during the pandemic. She's been growing this company rapidly, but it's pretty interesting to see that they've combined the IT function underneath the HR function. And the reasoning is very simple. Her position is companies do work. It's not just about the workforce. If you're going to do work, you have to look at what are all the things that this company does, and then ask the question, which parts of those can be handled by an AI agent? And if so, what's the remaining work for humans? It's a super important question I think every company needs to do. And I agree with your assertion that every company is eventually going to have a chief workflow officer that'll comprise these two areas. And Brian, a moment ago, you mentioned something I want to underscore because I think it's important because it really pertains to our show. You talked about not just looking ahead a year or two, but also positing out your example is 2030 and working your way back from a scenario in the future to today. And that's classic scenario planning. That's a great example of how scenario planning works. It's a very practical skill. Anyone can do it. You don't have to be a futurist or some kind of futurologist to do that. Anyone does it. We all do it when we go on vacation. We imagine ourselves in a vacation, and we have to think about, well, how do I get there? Where am I going to stay? What am I going to eat? What am I going to pack? And so everybody does this innately when they plan their own trips. But somehow when we come to a company, we feel like we're inhibited. We're prevented from doing that kind of future scenario planning. And what you're proposing is that this is a skill everybody needs to develop if they're going to deploy AI. They have to posit a future scenario where they're using this technology in the most effective way possible. And that might mean changes. And then you identify what those changes are and say, okay, for that scenario to be true, these 10 things have to happen. And now we have to work our way towards those 10 things one by one. And once all 10 are done and true, then this thing can become possible. Is that part of what's in the book?
Actually, this is on a side note. You just reminded me why it's been a long time since we talked. We were supposed to talk a while back around mind shift. That was my last book.
Another book.
Okay. And that book is what talks about this. It is how do you look to the future? How do you scenario plan? How do you find the things that you have to pay attention to?
Now you're putting in practice. That's very good. A futurist who eats his own dog food. I'm very happy to have you back on the show, Brian.
It's exactly right. I realized that I had never written any of that stuff down. I've been doing this since the 90s. And I was happy. I realized that after that book was done, there was like a big relief off my shoulders. Like, hey, I've just codified what I do for a living. And what we do talk about in the book, though, is more specifically, how do you break that cycle of iteration? We call it the iteration trap. And so we do get into the construct of the work necessary to start building for the future, the questions you need to ask and answer, the permission to give yourself the space to explore these new horizons. So in that regard, yes. But if you want to get into the discipline of futurism, then that's mind shift. But I'll give you an example. I was with
What a good author you are. You're like plugging the 2 books on one show. Like you're really killing it. Soon we're going to work in a couple of other books, X or something else. Even for those who aren't familiar, Brian's written 9 books. So brace yourselves. This could be plug-orama here today.
Well,
carry on. I'm sorry. My job is to poke fun at you sometimes.
Well, I'll poke fun at myself then. This is number 10, just for the record.
Oh. Okay.
It is, and this, I have to say, this is the most challenging book that I believe. I don't know. Well, Dave, Dave, I don't know how
I've written, so I've got no opinion.
I don't know how you feel about this, but it was a hard book to write because we see the problem, we see the challenges. We're both big thinkers and doers. But we couldn't just write a book about AI. I think that's what everybody's doing. And the irony is people are using AI to write books about AI. What we wanted to do was solve problems. Here's the big idea, and here's how to get there. And so I'll give you an example. There's on Monday or Tuesday this week, I was with 20 or so CIOs, CDOs with the D representing both data and digital, and then chief transformation officers. And everybody wanted to know about AI. Everybody wanted to understand all of the things that everybody wants to know about. But where the conversation got interesting is where I shared this saturated use case, but I want to talk about it, which is the IKEA example. Because everybody in the room was just talking about cost takeout and efficiency and improving data connections, et cetera, et cetera. And the IKEA example was you have a company that they want to increase automation, AI automation in service. They want to deflect inbound customer calls, and they deploy Billy, named after his famous bookcase, to handle those first round interactions. And Billy is so successful, it solves 47% of inbounds, which most companies would say that's fantastic. We can pay for that AI now by cutting a significant amount of human representatives that aren't necessary anymore because Billy's so effective. Instead, what they did is they studied what the others were about. What is Billy not able to deflect? And for 8,000 customer service representatives, that meant interior design. That meant interior design services, questions. And so they realized that there was a mode 2 opportunity here, which was, could we reskill those 8,000 agents, empower them with whatever technology they need to provide interior design services? That pilot became a 1 billion euro generating service within its first year, which I believe, Dave, you found out that 4% to its top line.
Yeah.
And now you have a mode 1, mode 2 story that forces this conversation about, well, what we didn't know to do, we now know we could do something, and here's the experiment, we'll make it tangible, and now we can cut costs and drive growth. And so in that room of these technology executives, when I shared that story, the conversation shifted from tech to, well, we don't even know how to do that. If I put people in a room to have a conversation about what to do differently, it would never have dawned on them to look at the other 43% or 53% of the conversation to see that there was an opportunity to be had there because they're so conditioned to iterate. And so then the questions became, how do we have that conversation? How do we change the dynamic in the room? And so this book breaks out all the conversations you need to have, how to have those conversations, and how to solve those problems. Dave and I even went through the exercise, Dave more so than me, to actually look at what reimagining an end-to-end workflow with AI at the core would look like and what it would take to do that. Mm-hmm. So this is not a theoretical book. It's not management theory. This is how to make your business have those conversations and do something about it.
Great. Let me redirect to Dave here because I want to build on what you're saying. And I think you're raising an excellent point. So what you're talking about, Brian, is how to break out of the iteration trap that you define, which is to use AI for incremental improvements that allow you to keep doing what you've been doing in the past without really making a significant change. And what you both argue for is the AI is a transformative capability. Instead of just doing last year's work tomorrow, you're going to do something, maybe doing something completely different. IKEA being the example where you're going to convert customer service center people into interior design services, and that was a successful example of that. They managed to do that quite well by reskilling the human workers, by training the human workers in a new skill that unlocked a new capacity for the company, turned into a revenue-generating business. And by the way, there's a contrast frame there, right? Because Klarna famously tried to replace its entire call center. They fired 700 call center people and replaced them with AI. And within 18 months, they had to roll back the entire initiative because what they found is that they did achieve cost savings, but they sacrificed quality, and customers were not happy. And anybody who's dealt with a call center with AI knows that there's a certain number of things AI can handle well. You know, I lost my password or something. Great, AI can handle that. So AI can handle the simple cases, but there's a certain number of cases, and I think you're about right, it's half or more, where there's some judgment that has to happen. Some independent thinking has to occur. AI is never going to be able to help you with that. That's a job for a human being to do. So famously, Clara had to hire back the 700 people that they fired 18 months later. So there's an example of how not to do it. Now, here's a question for Dave. After that long roll-up, here comes a question for Dave. So, Dave, you've done thousands of deployments. You've been at ServiceNow for 15 years. So you have seen the deployments, not necessarily of AI, but you've seen deployments of technology in companies again and again and again. We keep hearing that major corporations are having trouble with the AI rollout. You start the book with a question. What does it mean to build a company when intelligence is no longer scarce? And I want you to give me a version of that question that you would give to a CEO, but give me the short version of that. Like, how would you explain that mission to a CEO?
So I always start off by saying, my first question to everyone is, what's your AI strategy? And the answer that I'm going to give everyone is that, because whatever answer you give me, your AI strategy should not be about AI. Your AI strategy should be, how do you achieve something else from a business perspective? So the way I'd phrase that question to a CEO is, I'd say, let's say the company's got 10,000 people. I'd say, okay, if I come in and deploy AI across these 10,000 people, I'm going to be able to save everyone 30 minutes a day, which means nothing. I mean, so what? 30 minutes a day, more coffee, take the dog for a walk, do whatever. If I concatenate that 30 minutes a day across 10,000 people, that's the equivalent of 600 man heads, 600 people to your organization. So my question to a CEO wouldn't be, what's your AI strategy? My question would be, if I give you 600 heads for free, what would you do with them? And that's when they start. Now they're not thinking about technology. Mm-hmm. Now they're thinking, yes, we move into China, or we build this new product, or we build this new division. Mm-hmm. And that's what their actual strategy is. Now, how do we use AI to give you the money and resources to back you into getting to where you want to go, rather than just saying, I want to automate this call center?
Now, you've done so many deployments. You probably have also seen companies do it wrong. Tell me about some of the companies you see that get stuck in the iteration trap. You might not be able to talk about the specific names of the companies, but give me an example of how a company gets stuck in that iteration trap.
So they either just automate parts of a job where they haven't really thought about it. So they're not going to be able to remove any headcounts because they haven't fully automated the job. They haven't got a way to redistribute the work. So they're paying for the AI and they're not seeing any reduction. I've seen people go in and do the wrong measurements. I've seen people go in and say, hey, we're going to deflect this many customer service calls or this many employee cases. And they'll track the deflection rate and they'll go, oh, it's 90%. That's brilliant. And then I'll say to them, how many of them get reopened? And they'll go, oh, 45%. And you're like, well, your deflection, I can give you 100% deflection rate tomorrow. I'll just write an agent that gives a reply that says, goes to this link, closed. But you have to think about metrics in a different way. Or the other one is, I'll go to people who are using AI to code. And they'll say, oh, yeah, we've generated 10 million lines of code using AI. Mm-hmm. And you're like, is it good code?
No, yeah, no.
I don't know. It's 10 million lines. It doesn't matter.
Now we're going to talk about token maxing. Okay, right. We're at the brink of some good stuff. Folks, you are listening to The Futurists, and this week I'm talking to Dave Wright and Brian Solis. They are the co-authors of Infinite, How Visionary Leaders Transform Today's Businesses into AI-Forward Companies, a book recently published by Wiley. We're going to come back after a short break and continue the conversation to get a little more futuristic. Hang tight. We'll be back in just a minute.
Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. For information about all our podcasts, go to Provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
Hey, welcome back to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tercek, and this week I'm talking to Dave Wright and Brian Solis of ServiceNow, and they are the co-authors of a new book called Infinite, which is all about how to deploy AI successfully in a large organization. And they speak with some significant experience here, because if you're not familiar with ServiceNow, it powers the IT departments for a growing number of companies. And in some respects, ServiceNow has had to transform itself into an AI company. We'll dig into that in just a moment. But anyway, they've written this helpful book called Infinite. And one of the key principles that you raise, if you're going to be supervising this kind of deployment inside of a company, you need a way to measure success. And so, Brian, you introduced a concept called return on intelligence. And I guess that's a version of return on investment. And there is an investment, right? We often hear about cost savings from headcount reductions and layoffs in AI that are driven by AI. But I think sometimes people fail to take into account that automation costs money. It costs money to set it up. It also costs money to pay for tokens. So this is not a free thing. And so there has to be a way to measure success. Tell me about return on intelligence.
Absolutely. Well, there's we go back to the IKEA story we talked about earlier. So traditional ROI would have been headcount reduction on the human customer service representatives that were no longer necessary because AI was handling 47% of the inbound cases successfully.
And that on its own was 13 million, wasn't it, Brian? I mean, the savings just from that.
Yeah, that's huge. And that's exactly right, Dave. I left that part out earlier. That's a substantial amount of savings, of which then would be deemed a success by any company. It's a successful use case. But return on intelligence is a concept with now that you've saved these resources, what do you want to do? Like in Dave's example, with 600 heads. In this case, it was 8,000 heads, and then explore a new business opportunity that can create new value within the organization, which in that case was 1 billion euro in its first year. That's the concept of return on intelligence. If I free up resources, what new investments can I make that can yield net new returns? Mm-hmm. And then how would we measure those returns incrementally? So like as we're progressing in that pilot, what are we learning? How will we know when this is not working to pull out and then move into the next one? It's more of like a VC like or a founder like mentality. Yep. Going into your investments to look at, I understand that for the first year, my startup isn't going to generate net new revenue. We'll probably run underwater for a bit, but ultimately this is what success looks like. And then a venture capitalist knows that that's the exact business model that's going to happen. They're betting on the future returns of that work. And so it's essentially bringing this AI native mentality into the organization to teach traditional leaders how to think more like startups.
Okay, that's a good idea in theory. But let's think about that for just a second, because CFOs are not VCs, and they don't think like VCs. So if you tell a CFO we're going to use AI and that's going to give us a headcount reduction of, say 1,000 jobs, and we're going to save that money, CFO is going to say, fantastic. We're going to have great reports in the next quarter. When we talk to Wall Street. Then you say, well, hang on, no, we're going to reinvest that money in this other area. They're going to say, good, show me some hard metrics on how that's a better thing to do. And now you run into a challenge, right? Because return on intelligence sounds great in theory, but it's hard to measure. I don't know how it would show up on a spreadsheet. So if you can show me how that shows up on the balance sheet, that would be a powerful case, I think, if you can make it.
Well, everything I've learned about this concept of return on intelligence, I've learned from venture capitalists. And Dave, I'm sure you have ideas to share too. But they have their own spreadsheets that are very different than a traditional CFO spreadsheet. They have formulas that look at not just a 5, 10, 15, 20% returns, but 1,000x. That's what they're, that's what they're looking for. So it's not like we're reinventing the wheel here. It's just you have to get a new macro for your spreadsheet, if that's the analogy we want to use. But
well, I think you have to condition the CFO to a new language, right? A new way of describing this. And actually, what you're really talking about is conditioning the marketplace to accept that from a mature company. Not an easy thing to do, by the way, because mature companies are not nimble. They're not known for that. But here's the example I would use to light a fire under a company. As I mentioned to Dave, in the last couple of years, I've started a few companies, and recently, the last two companies I started are AI native, like they're AI at the core, and then we think about the work around the AI, which is very different from bolting AI into an existing company with a workforce. And when you look at it that way, you challenge every single hire. I'm working on a new venture right now, I'm organizing, and my co-founders have challenged me on every person in the headcount, every job in the headcount. They've challenged me because they're like, show me why we can't automate that. And it's a really good discipline, right? I think every company is going to have to start to do this at some point in the future. And so there, AI becomes the kind of foundational element of the company, and the challenge is human headcount. Like, why are we staffing up with humans? Why aren't we scaling with AI? When I talk to large companies, I've had the opportunity to talk to the the human resources departments of about 100 companies now because they're curious about my experience in this. I always ask them, where are they in the AI deployment? How essential is HR to the AI deployment? And they don't often have the ability to say anything because it's usually peripheral to them. It's done by operations and usually IT, but it is a workforce planning thing. We talked about that in the first part of the show. I bring all this up because this is like the fundamental shift of thought that you have to come to grips with. And I'm not certain that the C-suite in companies understands this just yet, that they have to redefine their business as a growth company, as a rapid growth company, put it in the same category. And the reason they have to do that is because there's thousands of people like me who are starting nimble AI native companies. And we're betting that we can scale our companies with AI faster than these big enterprises can manage this awkward transition where they're going to reskill their workforce. We think they're going to be slow, awkward, and they're probably going to fail. And so there's a foot race going on. And this is not just true of the small companies I've started. It's true in every category you can think of because AI is a general purpose technology. There are thousands of startup companies coming, and they're very tiny, but they're planning to scale with AI, and they're in a foot race against large organizations that are less nimble and are trying to bolt AI onto an existing business. And so there's the challenge that the CFO and frankly the CEO of an existing company have to deal with. It's like we have a mature business here, but who we're competing against isn't our known competitors. It's this new crop of startup companies that don't have the baggage and the legacy and the workflow that we already have. So I think that might be one way to do it. Obviously not a story necessarily for the CFO, but one for the CEO and the head of strategy. It's a strategic conversation. Now,
I think that's why though, Rob, you've seen, recently we've seen some of the CEOs of big companies actually saying, I don't know if I can do this next thing. We saw it at Walmart, we saw it at Coca-Cola. I've taken the company to this point.
Yeah.
But now it needs someone who can think about how to apply this technology in a different way. And I need to free up space to let someone come in and do that. So there is a shift happening in the industry where people are realizing they need to think differently. And you see this new metric coming in now where people are looking at RPE or revenue per employee. And the scenario you talked about, your revenue per employee could be millions of dollars, whereas a big enterprise company, it might be a couple of 100,000.
And to Brian's point, that's the metric that VCs are applying to startups now, right? In a way, Cursor has screwed it up for startups because their revenue per employee is so high. That's the benchmark everybody has to aim for now, and it's tens of millions of value per employee. That's a lot. That's a high bar. But honestly, I think the point we're making on this section of the talk is that applies to every company, including existing companies. So if you want to make an argument about why your company should exist in 5 years, you're going to have to subscribe to those metrics. That's a big challenge for companies, but it's kind of a wake-up call, I think, for not just the CFO, but the entire C-suite. Okay, let me give you a challenging question here because this is going to come up. I'm sure you've heard it. These days, skeptics like to challenge everything that comes out, including new books. And there's going to be some skeptic that looks at your book and says, well, hang on. These two guys work on innovation at ServiceNow, and ServiceNow is a SaaS company, and like all SaaS companies, it has to pivot towards AI. So how is this book not just a marketing brochure for ServiceNow?
We don't actually mention any ServiceNow product in the book. So it is, well, actually, it is a ServiceNow book. We're not making revenue from it. We wrote it on ServiceNow's time, so they can have the money for it. But the concepts are how you deploy AI. It doesn't actually matter what AI you're deploying. You could use different technologies. For us, we could do, if we were speaking to a customer around this, we could talk about how all those principles would apply to ServiceNow technology, but it's not product specific. We don't talk about any ServiceNow.
So you sort of separate the two things. You've written an industry neutral approach.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the response. Is there anything in the book that ServiceNow might not agree with?
Ooh, that's interesting.
We've never been asked that question. No, we had legal vet every single word through that. It's hard because I would say, and again, not to make this a commercial about ServiceNow, but we have a CEO in Bill who, in every conversation, is promoting the vision of AI business reinvention. Mm-hmm. We have Ahmed Zavery, who's our chief product officer, who is literally looking at every part of our company in our product development cycles and where we can be AI native. Like he's having your conversations inside of the company.
It's a hard conversation.
It's a hard conversation, but it's a necessary conversation.
Yeah.
We have Gina, our CFO, who is leaning into the front of the office, and having strategy roll into her. She's looking at investments for growth. So she has the mindset that you described earlier that every CFO needs to shift to. So we hope that that's a conversation that doesn't come up at all. What was missing from this equation is the how. How do you reinvent your business with AI at the center of it when we're not talking about the platform? And that book does not exist, by the way, in the market. So we looked long and hard about how are you going to write a book that's different from every other AI book. And we wanted to have a blueprint that we could go into customer meetings with, to not even talk about the platform, but let's get to the heart of your business. Anyone who could have that conversation is deserving to be in that room, and then it puts the company in a better position to have future conversations.
It's very true about the other books that are out in the market. So there's a lot of books about AI. There's plenty of books about what is AI, a whole genre of books that tell you about the doom scenario of how AI is going to take our jobs and destroy the world and make life miserable for everybody on the planet. I'm not particularly interested in that particular fantasy. It's a boring category for me. Then there's the other side, the cheerleaders for AI, and there's a bunch of books on that subject. But what they all seem to fall short on is the how. Tell me some practical tips for implementation. And so now let's leave ServiceNow out of the equation, because this isn't really about your company or your employer. Let's talk about your book, Infinite. And let's assume we're talking to a company that's mid-sized. We're talking to the CEO of a company that is a mid-sized company. They don't have a budget for ServiceNow. They are facing AI transformation as a challenge. They're open to it. What advice would you have for that CEO? How would you tell them to be on the infinite side of the ledger instead of the finite side of the ledger?
I think a lot of it would start with that same conversation we had before. What do you want to achieve from a business perspective? Ask them what problems they've got. What have you never done as a company because you couldn't do it? You either couldn't afford it or it was too complex to do it, but it's something that you really wanted to do. Having that conversation starts to open the aperture for whereabouts they want to go. And it might be, in a lot of these companies, especially a mid-sized company, it comes around scale. So they'll say, oh, we want to scale bigger, but we can't hire fast enough, or we want to scale bigger, but we haven't got budget. Then you can start to have a different discussion where it's not really mode one, cost reduction. It's not really mode two, thinking about something from an innovation perspective. It's how can you start to automate so you don't need to hire as many people next year? So kind of playing it forward and saying, how can we increase the capacity of your workforce that you want to do without increasing the capacity of your workforce? So start looking at things that aren't essential for a person to do. Start doing analysis of what are the most repetitious tasks that you do. And you're trying to automate those, not to free up resources to get rid of them, but to free up resources to do the other thing that you want people to do. But even getting in that mindset is very difficult for a lot of people. Just being
partly because it's hard enough to run a company. You're busy every day just dealing with the now and this quarter, and it's very hard to think. I find a lot of companies don't have a great habit of doing it, and that's why they tend to have an innovation department. Just to bring this all the way around the beginning of our conversation, they have an innovation team or a strategy team, and they kind of dump the problem of the future on the desk of that team. But that's almost always a fail. That's really a tough assignment inside a big organization, because now you're fighting the existing industry, the company. Yeah. There's kind of like an inertia in the company that you have to go against, because you say, no, we should be going in this direction. So if it's not really led from the CEO and the C-suite, it's a tough thing for that innovation team to gain traction. And I wouldn't recommend that. And I think that you don't recommend that either. Like you've said, this is a company-wide phenomenon. It therefore has to be a company-wide initiative.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's think about it specifically. Let's say there's a company that manufactures packaging, and it's a small company. It's mostly manufacturing with paper products. They're interested in AI. On the other hand, they have no idea what to do with it. So what is your advice for the CEO of a company like that? How would you tell them to begin framing this problem?
So I guess in that case, I'd start looking at I'd get them to break down the metrics of where revenue is generated and where it's expended. So understand what happens from a supply chain perspective, understand what happens from a distribution perspective, understand what happens from a product design perspective, from a product marketing perspective. Get all those individual components and then start to understand which of those components is costing the most for the company, whether it's costing the most from a manpower perspective or whether it's costing the most from a revenue perspective, and start to see if you can apply AI to any of those areas to be able to change that dynamic of people and cost, to be able to either generate budget or resource to do something
So
else.
that's your phase one. How do you get them to think about the phase two, the kind of future forward thinking?
So well, you can step in on this as well, Brian, I guess. But this is where you'd be saying, well, you are now a packaging company doing paper goods. Where do you see yourself in 2030? Are you going to sell more paper goods? Are you going to sell different types of packaging? Are you going to move into tin goods? Are you going to move into plastic packaged goods? As you get that vision for where they want to go, that helps you understand what the requirements are going to be for the company to get there. But you can also start to have conversations at that point around, well, if you don't want to move into a different area, if you just want to increase the volume that you're producing from a paper packaging perspective, that will be a different strategy for how you'd apply AI. But you have to have that conversation on a business level, I think.
I imagine it would also change customer relationships because it's, we tend to think this is one of the problems when we talk about AI. It's like you naturally gravitate towards, a particular job because that's the easiest thing for any of us to conceive of. So we've been talking, for instance, a lot about customer service and call center. That's an obvious starting point, right? We talked a little bit about writing software, but not every company writes software, but that's another case that's very clear. But we haven't talked at all about sales and marketing. And Brian, this is a subject, this is kind of your home turf, right? Sales and marketing is already largely automated on the web. And with AI, it can be even more automated. Now, what I imagine it's going to evolve to, this is a little more futuristic, but help me with this if you have ideas about this. I imagine it's going to evolve it into kind of an engagement system where you'll have an agentic thought partner for your customers. So to use the packaging company, I'm trying to use a really 19th century kind of company as an example here. So like a packaging company, they deal with paper, right? They deal with customers that may need boxes made, right? They're shipping goods. But that company could develop an agent that works with their customers to extract their future thinking. What are they imagining the business of the future is, and what does the packaging need to be, and what might it be? And so then you could create a tool that helps customers envision new products. And that would be incredible market intelligence, first of all, if you could get your customers to engage with that. But secondly, the company could actually start to see a future potential. If multiple customers are interested in a completely new style of packaging or a new delivery of packaged goods, that might be an opportunity for them. And actually, there's a company I have in mind here, which is Avery Dennison, which is a phenomenally innovative company that is constantly coming up with new ways to add new kinds of seals and new kinds of packages and new kinds of finishes on the package and so forth. So in fact, there is almost an infinite scope for innovation, even a very, very established industry like paper goods. Okay, so we talked about that. Brian, last thing, a little futuristic here. You've written 10 books. You've been future forward your entire career. Tell me, is there any place where you made a forecast in one of your previous books where you got it wrong, where it didn't come to pass? I'm asking because I just did this for myself. I made a list of all my forecasts from the last 20 years, and I don't get them all right. I mean, it would be kind of ludicrous to propose that you always get it right, but it's so instructive to see where you got it wrong. Is there any place, Brian, where you, in your previous books, made a forecast of a future scenario that didn't come to pass?
That's a really good question. I don't know because I'm not in the prediction business. And I think a lot of people believe that's what futurists are. If we go back to your example around scenarios and understanding what signals and trends are going to potentially bring a scenario around, I totally missed COVID. There was plenty of signals from Bill Gates early in the day that was something that was we should plan for, but I didn't put any resources into it. I missed the negative consequences of all of the forecasts around social media's prevalence in our society. And ultimately then, though, before it became a thing, did correct those forecasts that we were on a dangerous path and how it was going to affect politics and also our youth and society. I learned from that and started doing the same thing about how AI is going to do the similar things for us as human beings if we're not careful about how we use it. So I think the thing where I probably could be honest, there's for every 100 scenarios that I've played out, a big portion of those never happened. So that's fair to say. But I think the answer I'd love to give is that you have to be thinking about the future and you have to be prepared to be wrong. As Sir Ken Robinson said, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. And if you don't come up with anything original, you can't be innovative and you can't create new value. So I want people to understand that we have stigmatized being wrong, and that is the worst thing to do right now here as we reimagine the future with AI.
That's great. That's great. The fear of being wrong is what causes inaction. And in this current circumstances, inaction is probably the worst thing that you can do because you're staying stagnant while others are moving ahead. The learning curve is steep on AI for every person who uses it, and the gains are great. Everybody I know who is deeply focused on agentic AI feels like they're behind. Like they're like, I can't sleep, I can't take time off, I have to keep going, I have to keep trying new things because the learning curve is so steep and it evolves so rapidly. So that challenge is something that everybody seems to face. Now, there's one other related thing I want to ask you about because this seems to keep coming up. Just this morning, I read a piece from former Labor Secretary in the United States, Robert Reich, saying that there is now evidence that there is actually impact on the workforce from AI, and it's specifically coming from young workers, so people who are just entering the workforce. And he's saying it's somewhere between 0.5 percentage point and 1 full percentage point of additional unemployment. I don't know if those figures are accurate. I just read it this morning as I was getting ready for the show, but it's an interesting indication. It kind of confirms what we've been hearing anecdotally, which is that people who are graduating from college now are having a tough time finding jobs. Now, there's a lot of reasons why there may not be jobs for entry-level workers. For instance, there's a war, there's an energy crisis, we have tariffs, we have a completely unpredictable foreign policy and a kind of a somewhat erratic administration in terms of changing its policy every month or two. So it's very hard because companies crave stability and they want certainty, and we are in a very uncertain time. And within that context, AI adds another element of uncertainty. So now I have a question for you based on that, which is about apprenticeship. For 100 years, the way you learned how to do your job was you worked for somebody who knew how to do that job, and you had room to make mistakes. You had room to learn on the job. Our United States is not really good at like apprenticeships the way, say, Germany has an entire set of high schools devoted to training people in skilled crafts. We don't really do that in the United States. I don't know why. It just doesn't seem to be what we tend to do. We put that burden on companies. So companies have this internal training responsibility. And in fact, at Moderna, one of the reasons Tracy Franklin is so successful is that she has an innovation program that is there to train people on how to use AI. It's called the AI Academy. It's an upskilling program. So companies have this burden. Now, if they're not hiring young people, where are young people going to get the skills to develop the judgment that allows them to mature into leaders, into managers?
And stay tuned for part 2 of the Futurists.
It's a
showstopper at you. Come on, you take a shot at it.
It's an interesting question. I think part of it's because we talked before about how companies need to shift to adapt to the world of AI, and one of the things they do need to adapt to is thinking about the skill sets that they recruit to the organization. So I think if someone's very focused on the type of people they used to recruit in the past, and they're starting to automate some of those tasks, you need to get into that full mindset of, well, what type of jobs do we need in the future? What type of people do we need to fill those jobs? Yeah. Because the skills are there. You just don't need to hire the same people to do the jobs that you were doing in the past. You need to think about the jobs for the future. And we run a whole division called ServiceNow University, and we had a program in that called Rise Up, where we were trying to train, I think originally it was 1 million people we were trying to get trained up on ServiceNow. Now they've moved it up to 3 million, I think. But again, that was all, you could get someone that had a qualification in ServiceNow from an administration or a customization perspective, and that could get them a job. There wasn't people looking at degrees. We run that in universities because you can get graduates coming out that are now skilled in a specific product rather than just skilled in generalization. So it is a society factor, a society problem to fix, but it all comes down to thinking about things a little bit differently.
It's a really good point. I'm glad you raise it. When in my little micro companies, I've got a new approach to hiring, which is I generate a job description. Once my partners agree that we need to hire for that position, I generate kind of a list of all the tasks. And I interview candidates with that, and I say, tell me how you would automate. What tasks on this list would you automate, and how would you go about doing it? And that does a couple things for me. First, it tells me that the person is familiar with AI. Second, it shows that they're not afraid to automate their job because they know if they do that, they'll find something else useful to do. But third, it also tells me the degree of understanding that they have about the job and about how to apply AI to the job. So what I'm really screening for there is agency, and I'm trying to recruit high agency people. And to me, this is the workforce of the future. And this is a message not for employers or CEOs. This is a message for all employees who might be listening. If you are not developing high agency skills, if you're not fast forward into leaning into AI right now, you're probably falling behind, and that makes you vulnerable. I think that makes someone even more vulnerable than whether they're a young worker or an old worker or something else. It's how much agency do you have to automate parts of your job? It's a very interesting question when you ask people, even people who are senior roles, how much of your job have you automated? You get varied answers, and sometimes the answer is no, and to me, that's a red flag. Well, Gents, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I've really enjoyed it. Folks, you've been listening to Dave Wright and Brian Solis of ServiceNow. They've written this great book. It's called Infinite, How Visionary Leaders Transform Today's Businesses into AI-Forward Companies. And those are the themes that we've been articulating on today's episode. I hope you'll check it out. The book's published by Weil, and it's available now. And thank you both very much for joining the show. It's been a pleasure chatting with you and catching up with you, Brian.
Wonderful to be with you, Rob. Thank you so much.
Great fun.
All right, thanks.
Take care. And folks, we'll be back next week with another group of futurists who are thinking about and shaping the future the way they see it. Until then, we'll see you in the future. Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.